The most revealing part of King Charles's latest attempt to repair his family may be the person who was not there. On July 10th, 2026, Charles met Prince Harry, Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet at Highgrove. Queen Camilla was there too. It was private, deliberately so. No official photographs, no grand palace statement about healing, no carefully staged family portrait. But one fact mattered immediately. It was the first time the king had seen Archie and Lilibet since 2022. And yet Prince William was nowhere in that reunion. That is the contradiction at the center of this royal story. Charles is a father who appears willing to reopen a door to his younger son, but he is also the king, and William is not simply Harry's brother. William is the heir, the future monarch, and the man whose relationship with Harry remains far more damaged. So Charles is facing a problem no royal ceremony can solve for him. Can he rebuild a relationship with Harry without making William feel that the cost of reconciliation is being ignored? The Highgrove meeting did not come out of nowhere. It followed years in which father and son had moved between distance, brief contact, and public disagreement. Harry and Meghan stepped away from royal duties in 2020 and eventually settled in California. In the years that followed, the dispute stopped being only about where they lived or whether they carried out royal engagements. It became about trust. In the 2021 Oprah Winfrey interview, Harry said his father had stopped taking his calls. In 2023, Harry's memoir, Spare, described deeply personal family conflicts, including his account of a physical confrontation with William during an argument about Meghan. Kensington Palace did not publicly respond to that allegation. That distinction matters. Harry placed his version of private royal life into the public record. William did not answer it publicly. From that moment, any reconciliation between the brothers became more complicated than simply arranging a meeting. Then came February 2024. Buckingham Palace announced that Charles had been diagnosed with cancer. Harry quickly flew to Britain and saw his father in London. The meeting was brief, but its emotional meaning was obvious, even without anyone revealing the conversation. A son who had been living thousands of miles away came home after learning his father was seriously ill. But the visit did not produce a broader family reset. Harry did not meet William. That pattern became important. Contact with Charles could still happen. Contact with William could not be assumed. So what was actually stopping father and son from getting closer? For Harry, one major issue was security. After stepping back as a working royal, he lost the automatic level of taxpayer-funded police protection he had previously received. He challenged the arrangements in court, arguing that the system for deciding his protection in Britain had treated him unfairly. In May 2025, after losing an appeal, Harry gave a BBC interview in which he said he would love reconciliation with his family. But he also said Charles was not speaking to him because of the security dispute. That interview showed the problem in miniature. Harry was publicly asking for peace while publicly criticizing a system closely associated in the public imagination with the royal establishment. Charles, meanwhile, is a constitutional monarch. He cannot simply order government security bodies to give Harry whatever protection he wants. That did not make the family tension disappear. It made it harder to separate the emotional dispute from the institutional one. The first small answer came in September 2025. Harry and Charles met for tea at Clarence House, their first face-to-face meeting in around 20 months. There was no dramatic announcement of reconciliation, no claim that years of conflict had been erased. But the meeting mattered because it proved the relationship was not completely frozen. It also created a new question. If Charles could sit down with Harry, could he become the bridge between his sons? So far, there is no evidence that he has. Reuters reported that relations within the family remained strained, especially between William and Harry. By the time Harry returned to Britain in July 2026, the father-son relationship had moved enough for another private meeting to become possible. But the brother-to-brother relationship still appeared stuck, and July almost went badly before that meeting even happened. Harry had hoped to bring his children to Britain. Security arrangements again became a problem. There was also a dispute over where he would stay. A royal source said Harry had not accepted an invitation to stay at a royal residence by the required deadline. Harry's side said he could not immediately accept because he was still trying to arrange security. It was exactly the sort of logistical disagreement that, in this family, could easily become symbolic. Was the palace shutting him out? Was Harry refusing an offered compromise? Was security a genuine obstacle or another battlefield in a larger argument? The verified facts were less sensational. An offer existed. A deadline was missed. Harry's representatives linked the delay to security. The situation remained tense. Then, days later, the tone changed. Harry, Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet went to Highgrove, Charles's private home in Gloucestershire. The King and Queen Camilla met them there. The palace described it as a private family occasion. That setting mattered. Highgrove is not Buckingham Palace. This was not a balcony. It was not a state event. It was not Harry returning as a working royal. It was a family visit at the king's home. That gives us the second small answer. Charles can make space for Harry as a son without automatically restoring Harry as a royal operator. Those are not the same thing. And that distinction may be the only way reconciliation can work, because William's position is fundamentally different from Charles's. Charles can look at Harry primarily through the relationship between father and son. William has to look at him through at least two relationships at once: brother and future king. As a brother, William has his own history with Harry. As heir, he also represents the future direction of the monarchy. Anything that looks like a return of Harry to the royal center would eventually affect William's household, William's reign, and William's authority. That is why the word reconciliation can be misleading. There is personal reconciliation, where relatives decide to speak again. There is public reconciliation, where they appear together. And there is institutional reconciliation, where Harry could somehow regain a place close to the working monarchy. The first may be possible without the second. The second may be possible without the third. But if Charles blurs those boundaries, the risk becomes much greater. William and Harry were once presented as a natural pair, bonded by the loss of their mother and by the strange pressures of royal life. But that shared history does not guarantee shared trust. Their last major public show of unity came after Queen Elizabeth II died in September 2022, when William, Catherine, Harry, and Meghan walked together outside Windsor Castle to greet mourners. The image looked like a temporary restoration of the old royal team. It was not. Months later, Spare arrived with Harry's account of their private conflicts. Since then, the brothers have appeared at some of the same major family moments, but not as reconciled partners. That makes the emotional stakes sharper for Charles. A king can issue invitations. A father can ask for peace. But neither role gives him the power to make two adult sons trust each other again. So is William actually opposed to Charles seeing Harry? There is no public statement from William saying that. That is important, because royal coverage often fills silence with certainty. Reports have repeatedly described the brothers as estranged, and credible reporting says there has been no meaningful movement toward reconciliation between them. But that is not the same as proof that William has demanded his father cut Harry off. The real tension is subtler. Charles does not need William's permission to see his son. But if Charles tried to force a wider family reunion, publicly rehabilitate Harry inside the institution, or behave as though the old grievances no longer mattered, that could create a new conflict with the heir. And this is where the question in the title finally has an answer. Yes, King Charles can reconcile with Harry without losing William, but only if the reconciliation remains what the Highgrove meeting appeared to be: personal, private, gradual, and separate from Harry's former royal role. Charles can be Harry's father without making Harry William's partner again. He can see Archie and Lilibet without requiring William to rebuild his relationship with their father. He can forgive what he personally feels able to forgive without announcing that William must do the same. And above all, he can avoid turning reconciliation into a royal policy that the future king is expected to inherit. That is the line. If Charles stays on one side of it, he may be able to repair part of his family. If he crosses it, the issue stops being a father reconnecting with a son and becomes a question about the structure of the monarchy William will eventually lead. That is why Highgrove may be more significant than a palace balcony ever could have been. There was no attempt to make the public watch the family heal. There was no image demanding that people believe everything was fixed. The privacy itself reduced the pressure. And for a family whose conflicts have repeatedly become public property, privacy may now be the most valuable currency left. But even that comes with a contradiction. Harry has said publicly that he wants reconciliation. He has also spent years explaining his grievances publicly through interviews, a documentary series, legal cases, and a memoir. From his point of view, speaking out was part of telling his story and protecting his family. From the monarchy's point of view, however, private trust becomes difficult when intimate disagreements can later become headlines. That is not an accusation about what Harry will do next. It is simply the central trust problem created by what has already happened. And William may be the hardest person to persuade because the most damaging public material was not only about the institution, some of it was about him personally. Charles can forgive an attack he believes was aimed at him. He cannot forgive one on William's behalf. That gives us the third small answer. The king can open the door. He cannot decide who else walks through it. There is another reason the pace matters now. Charles is still undergoing cancer treatment. He has continued carrying out public duties, but the diagnosis changed the emotional timetable around this family. Harry himself made that clear when he spoke in 2025 about not knowing how much longer his father had. For Charles, time with his grandchildren is not an abstract constitutional issue. Archie and Lilibet live in California. Their contact with their grandfather has been limited. The July 2026 meeting gave Charles something years of public debate could not actual time in the same place with them. That is a human fact before it is a royal one. And it may explain why the father-son relationship has a different path from the brother-brother relationship. Charles and Harry have something immediate to rebuild: contact. William and Harry would have to rebuild trust. Those are not equal tasks. Contact can begin with a cup of tea, an invitation, a visit, a birthday call, another private meeting. Trust is slower. It requires confidence that old wounds will not immediately become new public weapons. It may require apologies. It may require boundaries. And because neither brother has publicly laid out a negotiated path back, it would be reckless to pretend we know what terms either man privately needs. There is also a future problem Charles cannot solve permanently. One day, William is expected to become king. If Harry remains outside the working monarchy, the practical relationship between the brothers may become even more important, not less. Questions about access, family events, royal residences, titles, security, and public appearances could all become more sensitive when the head of the family is William rather than their father. That means Charles's reconciliation cannot simply be about making the present feel warmer. If it is to last, it must avoid creating obligations William never agreed to. A private relationship between Charles and Harry can survive into the future as a memory, a family bond restored before it was too late. A forced institutional settlement may not. And perhaps that is the most painful truth in this story. The royal family cannot go back to the photograph people remember. William and Harry are no longer two young princes walking behind the same duty, living inside the same institution, and building the same public future. Their lives have separated. Their wives and children live in different countries. Their responsibilities are different. Their ideas about privacy, press, and royal life have collided in public. Reconciliation, if it comes, will not mean returning to what existed before 2020. It will mean building something smaller and more realistic. For Charles and Harry, that may be enough. a father and son who speak, a grandfather who sees his grandchildren, meetings that are private because privacy is part of rebuilding confidence, no promise of a royal comeback, no demand that every family member move at the same speed. For William, the safest version of that arrangement may be one that asks nothing from him yet, not approval, not a public embrace, not a staged walkabout, not a declaration that the past is forgotten, just space. That may sound cold, but in a family where duty and emotion have been tangled together for decades, space can be the difference between a fragile peace and another rupture. Charles's challenge is not to choose Harry over William or William over Harry. It is to stop treating reconciliation as if one son's healing must require the other son's surrender. The Highgrove meeting suggested that may be possible, but it did not prove it. Because the next test will not be whether Charles sees Harry again. The next test will be whether those meetings can happen without new public battles, new institutional demands, or pressure on William to participate before he is ready. If they can, Charles may still recover part of the family he thought he had lost. If they cannot, he may discover that bringing one son closer only exposes how far apart the brothers remain. For all the titles, palaces, and constitutional language, this comes down to something painfully ordinary. A father running out of time, two sons who no longer trust each other, and the question of whether love can be rebuilt without pretending the damage never happened. Charles can open the door. Harry can choose whether to walk through it carefully, but only William can decide whether he will ever open his own. What would real reconciliation look like to you?